So, finances and how they interact with romantic relationships are a very big deal. In fact, money issues are cited as the main factor in approximately 20% of divorces, and they are cited as a contributing factor in up to 40% of divorces. So, having open communication about how you plan to handle and split your finances in your relationship is super critical to ensure that you avoid resentment and issues in the long term. So, there are many permutations of how couples split their finances, but most are choosing between three popular methods. So, the first, combining all income into one joint account. The second, keeping separate finances, but then sharing the cost proportional to the income, which means that you take into account how much each person is earning, and that's their level of contribution to the shared expenses. And then third, going 50-50 across all expenses, regardless of how much each person makes. And while there isn't great data on what all couples are doing today, studies estimate that what most couples are doing, between 50 to 70%, is going 50-50. And that's usually because most are earning within like a similar income bracket, with income differences or large income differences being the main reason why people opt for a different split.
Let's explore tradition and the view that the man always pay 100% of the expense when dating. Now, most people think that tradition is something that's just commonplace or has just always been, and that isn't completely true. Traditions frequently change in societal structures or time periods, with each generation thinking that the thing that they experience just has always been. When it comes to dating expenditures, or what used to be known as courting, the idea of a man covering all of the dating expenses was a popular idea amongst men and women of certain means. This is where the man came from a more financially stable background or family and was dating a woman from an equally financially stable background or family. At this time, women of this station were considered more like high-value property and were often not allowed to work as well. This means that for that woman to marry into a family of a certain means of similar status, the man was often allowed to acquire her almost like property, and in the process needed to demonstrate pure intention by spending money to court that also demonstrated that he could afford to acquire her. At the same time, in societies where men and women were both allowed to work, and or men and women both came from lesser means, it was much more likely that both the man and the woman worked, and that expenditures were determined by pooling resources and spending money on the things that you needed. As you can see, what many of us have been taught to believe is traditional actually was much more situational. No firm tradition had been established that existed apart from circumstances and societal structure. So, how should today's modern circumstances and societal structure influence dating? Well, as always, we've got data. As of Q4 2024, the median wage for men was around $1,300 a week and $1,100 a week for women. This is 83 cents on the dollar for the average woman versus the average man, or the median woman versus the median man. Not as much as men make, but also potentially enough to be able to contribute some as deemed appropriate. This number was even closer for women between the ages of 25 to 34, where they actually earned 95 cents for every dollar that the man earned. When you pair this with the ever-increasing cost of living and, of course, the cost of dating, like activities, eating out, or travel, it makes much more sense that there might be a conversation to be had here. In fact, the average cost of running a household today exceeds the median salary of both the man and the woman. So in this scenario, does it make sense for men to be the sole payers? In a society where both men and women are striving for a new paradigm of equality, what happens to all the old ways that reinforced or were designed to reinforce inequality?
So when people are thinking about how to have a discussion on how to split finances, the discussion is obviously broader than that. It isn't just finances, but a discussion of how to divide all of the labor and expenses that exist inside of a household fairly between those that contribute to it. Part of the issue that we're dealing with is recovering from an era when women couldn't be in the workforce. And what that meant was that their contribution to the household existed with housework and child rearing. And then when women entered the workforce en masse, those chores didn't just go away, and many couldn't afford to necessarily outsource them. And so we end up in a situation where even 50 years later, we have women contributing most of the unpaid labor for households, even in homes where they are the primary breadwinner. So in 2022, a study from Pew Research showed that in egalitarian marriages, so marriages where the wife and the husband are contributing equally to the combined earnings, Wives are spending more than double the time that men are on housework, so 4.6 hours weekly compared to 1.9 hours respectively. And other research shows that women are contributing more than 60% of both the cognitive and physical labor load of housework. So in either direction, the data is clear. Women on average are carrying more of the non-financial burden in households. And so when we're having a discussion of how we split finances, we really should make it a broader discussion of how we split all the responsibilities in a household to make sure that we're having a fair and just conversation. A disclaimer before we go into this discussion that thoughts around how relationships should work, especially on the financial level, are often deeply embedded into our subconscious. And so the way in which you perceive that things are normal might actually be influenced by your own individual experiences and the way in which you've interpreted those.
The first and earliest thing that influences views on financial expenditures in relationships is what you saw growing up in your household and your perception of how well that played out. For example, if you grew up in a household where one parent handled all of the expenditures and that played out particularly well, you are more likely to want to mirror that in your future relationship or to think that that is the best way to move forward in a relationship. On the same hand, if you saw one parent handle all the finances and you perceived it as a significant source of stress, you're more likely to either seek significant financial security in a partner where you're certain that they can provide and handle all of the finances in abundance, or you're more likely to look at having a household where both provide or where one at least provides a floor so that you only go so low if there's an issue with financial provision. Same might go for any households where the split was more 50-50 and you perceived it to either work well or not work so well. These perceptions shape our philosophies, and while these are households we're talking about, a lot of that translates to dating and the dating process. They likely influence your view on dating in order to resolve what you perceive as a safe household.
Second, any relationship trauma or experiences from your past, the way in which finances were split in previous relationships that you've experienced, and whether or not you perceive that to be effective or not, is going to be a contributing factor to how you think about finances in relationships today. We are always incorporating new information and making assumptions about what we perceive to be the factors that were a part of the success and or lack of success, and dating is no different.
Lastly, what you were taught or socialized to think about perception of value can have an influence. It influences your perspective on your individual value, how someone shows they value you, and maybe even on how you value the other person. If you consciously believe that a man needs to financially provide from the get-go to demonstrate that he values you or to show that he has enough value to be able to provide the relationship or the lifestyle that you want, then going 50-50 might be a red flag for you. This may come across as a sign to you that he either doesn't value appropriately or enough, or that he can't afford a lifestyle that meets your desires. If you're consciously looking for a partnership, you may not think that financial provision is the sole indicator of how someone provides value, because there's going to be more of an exchange back and forth across a number of things. Neither is wrong, but our socialization is a heavy factor and influence on how we perceive or think about what going 50-50 or any other split actually means. This socialization may also influence your perception of value, equity, or exchange. For example, even in a partnership, some people may think that while they shouldn't spend money, that their exchange of value is that they provide a soft place to land or support for a partner. And in some cases, even being a showpiece to make their partner look good. Again, no judgment, but as you can see, the concept of going 50-50 is loaded with influences, norms, perceptions, and socializations, all of which can feel deeply personal to any individual.